A biblical perspective on life, culture and current events. This is 2020 on Vision.
Well, you know what? I watched the Prime Ministerial Leaders Debate last night. You gentlemen might have watched it too.
Yes, we did.
It was a little bit wooden on both sides. But one thing that stood out very, very clearly to me was that none of the questions, either the set questions that might have come from the adjudicator or from the audience, had anything to do with the social issues that our nation is facing, nothing to do with freedoms and the challenges that are facing us. Now, perhaps they will come out, but nothing really at all last night.
A biblical perspective on life, culture and current events. This is 2020 on Vision.
1-800-316-316 to join in our conversation today as we're talking about woke universities. And the bigger picture is this. Is this leading to national decline, Australian decline? Here we are. We've got an election that's coming, and some of the very, very important issues are being glossed over, perhaps with the excuse that cost of living pressures are the main thing that we ought to be talking about. But woke universities leading to national decline. Our talkback line's open on 1-800-316-316. Augusto Zimmermann, when we talk about being a Christian and being concerned for the welfare of the city that we live in, maybe the welfare of our nation, is there something in a conversation around what's happening in our universities that as Christians we need to be particularly concerned about? How does that look to you?
I think it's a very important point that you make. It's not a pleasant environment for Christians, universities these days. My understanding of the matter is that many Christians feel uncomfortable to express their opinions in class out of a very reasonable fear of being ostracized and perhaps and quite potentially punished for their opinions, the expression of their opinions. Some academics, as I have mentioned, they are pushing certain agendas. They are not really normal teachers. They are enforcing their ideology upon the students. And the students who think more critically and or dare to have a different opinion can be severely punished as a result. And they punished academics themselves. When I was in a certain university working for them, they were heavily pushing very radical anti-Christian agendas. And I knew that I was taking risks for expressing and even writing articles opposing to their official agenda. But it's unbelievable that a federally funded institution dares to push controversial issues and impose this agenda on their own academics and forcing the whole university to embrace certain ideologies. This is immoral and it's unacceptable.
Yeah. And Augusto, it is not just the Christians who are in danger of being ostracized in universities. Look at what is happening to the Jewish people in Australia. It's no longer safe for them to walk on campus because they are being attacked or vilified by pro-Palestine students. Last year I was teaching in a southern university and there was a tent city. And the tent city was ugly, there were utensils everywhere. It was really very bad. And it was a very big tent city. And every morning and afternoon, I had to walk through the tent city, which was rather dangerous and inconvenient to get to my lecture theater. Now, this should not be tolerated in a university. I always tell my students, that they should read that famous, iconic book that was written by John Mill in the 19th century on liberty. We have to have free speech, and free speech, of course, should be used to help yourself, to assist yourself in getting a better life, but never to harm other people. And that is precisely what was happening down there when I was trying to work my way through the maze of the tent city.
John Stuart Mill and his writings about liberty.
On liberty.
And liberty. 1-800-316-316. Let's take a call. Mark is in South Australia. Hey, Mark, welcome along.
Good day, Neil. How are you? And great stuff, you guys, putting these conversations together for people to join. And thank you for your guests for their contributions. Just a bigger societal thing. We're talking about obviously universities, but I see this as a much bigger problem, because we see now, obviously, with the USAID funding and the universities in Australia getting that funding, and it just seems like there's a lot of cashed up people that are able to fund these kind of ideologies in our universities, but not just our universities, but also in general in regards to our political realm. You know, I don't know if you've listened to Pat Massetti or Trevor Loudon talk about, his book Comrade Prime Minister. So there seems to be like these people come out of universities, and there's a lot of funding into even our political realm. How do we get out of this is the big question, especially when our voices are so heavily suppressed, and mainstream media just seems to go along with a certain narrative. How do we get people together to kind of break through to the 80%?
Good question, Mark. Let's get a response from Augusto Zimmermann, because the money is coming from outside of the universities that may well be promoting the sorts of ideologies that are on display.
Oh, that's right. For instance, there is this Ramsay Center for Western Civilization, and some universities were, I think, given the privilege to promote Western values. And the staff, the academic staff, opposed to be the recipients of this generous amount, because the money required the teaching of Western civilization. But then you have universities who are accepted, that are effectively accepting money from foreign investors, even countries that have no good track records on human rights issues. I would say, for instance, that money comes from Middle Eastern countries and China. There is a center to promote Chinese communist ideology, they call the Confucianist centers. There is a center to the advancement of Islam. But when we try to set up such a center to advance Christianity or Western civilization, these universities would not accept the money, because that is contrary to the agenda of destroying our civilization. So that's the point that I have to make. And of course, US aid now has been found contributing to the achievement of these goals, using American taxpayers' money to corrupt our societies and even to destabilize regimes, as they did in Brazil when they placed a communist in power now, and they are doing the same in places such as Ukraine and many other countries.
Mark, any quick follow-up from that? Because we're about to go to news. Mark, anything further to add?
No, look, just as a Christian, I guess I'm really concerned about the influences of, communist, Marxist, socialist kind of ideologies coming into our country. But I'm really grateful for voices like Augusto and so forth to be able to, and use their platforms to be able to talk about these issues openly, even though the reach might not be as far as we'd like. So thank you all for your contributions.
Let's come to you, Gabriel Moens. Surrounding the thought of universities in Australia, I had an economist, Dr. Rod St. Hill, with us just recently and unpacking some issues around the federal budget. And of course, one of the conversation points that came up was to do with Australia's immigration rate, and as many as 1 million new migrants coming into Australia over these past couple of years. When I asked Rod St. Hill what that meant for, say, Australia's education system, he said our universities would collapse without the numbers of new migrants. I wonder if you've got a comment on that.
Well, I certainly have a comment, and I would agree with that. Last year, in 2024, 570,000 foreign students commenced their studies in Australia. Universities these days, are no longer involved in educational pursuits. That's a byproduct of what they do. They have become profit centers, major corporations who want to make money. Last year, I was teaching a unit in a university down south, and I had 160 students in my class, and 155 of them were Chinese. Now, presumably, some of them may have been Chinese Australians, but the overwhelming majority, about 150, would have been from the mainland China. And obviously they would have paid a lot of money to the university, sustaining the prosperity of the university. And I can tell you that many of these students who were admitted by the university could not speak any English, not even conversational English. They could hardly ask a question of me, and therefore they could not contribute to any sensible discussion. And yet, and this is very interesting, when they submitted their papers at the end of the semester, these papers were impeccably written, excellent English, and I have no idea how it is possible to come up with a perfectly written essay if you can't really speak the language at all. So I have my doubts as to what was happening there.
Well, it sounds like evidence that AI is affecting the way that those university papers are being written. Did you have something to comment there too, Augusto?
Yes.
Because when we talk about universities as profit centres, what does that mean for the standards of learning in our universities? And as you mentioned a little earlier, I might add, where Chinese money is coming in, or money from Saudi Arabia supporting Middle Eastern studies, that sort of idea about profit centres, all the money speaks very loudly, doesn't it?
Of course. There is a saying in my country, native country, I have dual citizenship, but it says that if you pay the bill, you choose the dish. The person who is invited will have to accept the tastes and the preferences of the person who invites you. So the point with the universities in Australia, I experienced this from the very beginning, more than 20 years ago, is that they not really in the business of educating properly, but it's, as Professor Moens explained very clearly, that it is about profit. It's about, I will put this in very blunt terms here, it's about making money. And if you try to do the right thing, you'll be punished. Not only that, I can say punished even not necessarily losing your job, especially if you have tenure, but you are going to be punished. You'll very hardly be promoted because universities base their promotion on student surveys. So you are actually there to entertain the students and to make them happy. I don't think they will be happy with you if you do take your job seriously and if you mark properly. So I'll give another example. I had 200 students in my first year teaching in Australia. 200 students is not a serious business. I mean, I can't teach 200 students in a class. It's impossible. Most of them were not to be there. They were not capable of writing properly. But I was supposed to pass everyone. When I failed about 10 students out of 200, the administration was scandalized with me because I'm supposed to be passing everyone. And the professor, the academic, is not supposed to be marking properly. You have to actually treat the students as clients who must be pleased by the service provided, which is ultimately to give them a degree.
Sounds like universities have become like child-minding centres.
Yes.
And the quality of graduates sounds like it is being undermined by these sorts of things. Hey, 1-800-316-316 to join in our conversation. Let's take another call. Graham is in Orange in New South Wales. Hey, Graham, welcome.
Hey, good morning, Neil.
Graham, great to hear from you. What are your thoughts?
Well, I'd like to ask Augusto and Gabriel a number of questions, but a couple do. But I just heard on the news, actually, that Argentina has just commenced a Christian university there, its first university, and they have a population of evangelical Christians, about 15%. But you did talk about 38 of the universities in Australia of the 42 that are woke. I was just wondering, the first question is, which are the four? And my own experience with a daughter attending the local university here was that she wanted to, everyone in communications there had to give a talk about something. So she decided to talk about our Christian heritage in history and development of Australia. And she was told to sit down. She was cancelled. Now, that was in the late 80s, where a university there, its Marxism was the main theme, I think. And then when Russia fell, the communist Russia, they decided, I think, on feminism to replace it. But that's just incidentally. But I really think that the question that we should ask is the development of Christian tertiary institutions in Australia, and what those ones that are developing. And I know Augusto has had a lot to do with that. I'd really like to hear from him about what's happening as far as development of Christian universities.
Okay. Augusto Zimmermann, 38 out of 42 are woke, and there might be 4, and listeners might be interested in any sort of clue here. What can you share with our listener, Graham?
And I think it's lack of vision. The fact that even Indonesia has Christian universities, and it speaks volumes about the commitment of the body of Christ to the culture and to the nation, that we do not have a decent Christian university at this point. But there are some people with vision trying to develop this project. There are a couple of university colleges in Sydney, Christian university colleges, and so there is hope for change. I believe that's the way to go, that you need to set up Christian universities that truly value academic freedom. But some universities in Australia who claim to be Christian would refer to Notre Dame, for instance, is employing the wrong people. The recent appointment of the law dean at Notre Dame is speaking volumes to the state of this nation, when they have employed a person who claims that he is inspired by the works of Karl Marx, Antonio Gramsci, and some other very radical communist thinkers of the past. So it's a tragedy when you have institutions that lose their soul because of the wrong appointments. So that's the point. It's not just about opening Christian universities, to preserving the ethos of the university and making sure that the appointments made are proper, because once you start to make the wrong appointments, everything goes downhill as a result.
And Graham, anything further to add?
Well, I think that under Joe Bjelke-Petersen, we tried to start a Christian university there, but the Labor Party came in, and that's only because of the corruption that existed under Joe with Lewis and others. But it's a shame, because when the Labor Party came in, they immediately closed that issue down of commencing one. And so I think under Labor, we'll always have our opposition, like, for instance, even Calvary Hospital. So I just think that we need a real renewal in our nation to just change it in all these aspects, because we're just sort of fighting bushfires all the time, and it seems to me that revival is the only way to save our nation.
Wonderful stuff. Graham in Orange in New South Wales. Graham, thank you so much for great input today here on 2020. Let me come to something that, before you get to university, you're going through the education system, whether it's right from preschool into primary school and secondary school, before you even get to university. We're talking about universities, but doesn't the problem start right back at the beginning? Isn't there a progression? I'll come to you, Gabriel Moens, because the things that are being missed in the formation of children are contributing into where we're at the moment. How do you see the start here?
Yes, Neil, we talk about that issue in chapter 12 of our book. And indeed, the rot is not only in universities, but it starts very early in a child's education in primary school. And of course, that is exacerbated in high school as well. Now, in my opinion, and I'm talking about experience, children these days are no longer taught grammar. And if you are no longer taught grammar, you are no longer able to develop well-rounded sentences, you know. For example, if you ask a primary school child what is an apostrophe, well, they would have no clue what you are talking about.
Yes.
If you are talking about the subjunctive, mind you, they would not know what you're talking about. If you talk about the conditional tense, they would have no clue what you're talking about. And the person, or I should rather say the system that is responsible for this decay is what is called systemic grammar. According to the rules of systemic grammar, you have to allow people the freedom, the flexibility to speak as they want, regardless of any rules or regulations or structure. And therefore, the outcome is absolutely dreadful. They are no longer able to write properly. And mind you, there is one other point before I finish here. It's more important in high school and in primary schools to behave in accordance with the woke agenda. So students in those schools these days are taught to hate our country, to hate the history, to hate the civilization that we have created in this country. And that, of course, will inevitably lead to students who are already indoctrinated by the time they go to university, and their views of hate basically will be confirmed by left-wing academics, and the university these days are full of them.
Who would have thought that those simple things like learning basic grammar, like punctuation, in your sentences is going to lead to a national decline? If you can't do those things, if they're not being taught in primary school, that flows over into secondary school and then into the university. And if you can't be literate, if you can't understand basic grammar when you're actually studying even any ancient and great book, you need to be able to have some punctuation to be able to discern what is being said. Augusto Zimmermann, is this just something, a very simple thing that, I know that everyone's been trying to resolve literacy for a long time, and illiteracy in Australia is growing dramatically, but is this an area that you have to address if you're going to address woke universities?
Absolutely. And the consequences of this process, they are destructive entirely to society. Can you imagine a lawyer who doesn't know how to write? And that's what's happening at this very point in time. Some of these students of mine, I always tell them, look, you're getting your degree, but never tell anyone that you have been my student, because I don't want to be responsible for your damage. And this is a really tragic thing when you have people who get a law degree and destroy people's lives as a result because they are unable to write an affidavit. But I'm really worried about medicine. I hope that in the Faculty of Medicine, they are not forming this sort of people, because that will be very harmful to the lives of innocent people. So what the governments are doing in Australia is criminal and probably leading to causalities in the process.
Okay, so just connecting the dots. You can't do grammar, you can't punctuate. You get through your primary school and into your secondary school, you're enrolled in university, but you haven't developed any way of a disciplined reasoning because you haven't been able to think clearly or critically at all during your primary and secondary school years. So when you get to university, then you are just under the direction of what the ideology is in the university, and you are then about preserving diversity and the DEI, diversity, equity and inclusion. Gabriel Moens, are we just being manipulated in a way that, as we expose these things today? I mean, I'm sure there'll be listeners saying, "Yep, that's exactly what happened to me." How do you feel about this? I mean, it's just tragic.
Yes, DEI really didn't exist about 15 years ago. In the 1980s, I wrote a book about affirmative action, and I argue that hard affirmative action, which is essentially DEI, will not serve Australia well. That is precisely what we have nowadays. We have hard affirmative action where people are appointed no longer on the basis of their merit, individual merit, but on the basis of their race or their sex or their gender or their ethnicity. And once you do that, you are trying to create a workforce which is representative of all the groups that live in society, but you are no longer going to have the best or the most suitable people for a particular job. That is, I think, one of the diseases of the university system as we know it today.
Let's squeeze in a quick call. Phil is in Melbourne. Hey, Phil, welcome.
Thank you.
What are your thoughts, Phil?
My thoughts are basically that I've had a degree in the economic field, and then I found that my B's and C's started turning into E's and F's, and I realised that I was in an alien environment, so I basically gave myself intermission, which was about 8 years ago, and so for the last 8 or so years I've been waiting for a return of objective critical thinking so that I can finish my master's.
Phil, it doesn't sound like it's on its way back anytime soon.
No.
And
Yes.
I'll thank you so much for your call. Time is running out. Just to reflect on a text that came through one listener, who's Angus, who says, just a comment from the current segment regarding education. I believe it starts from childcare. Babies as young as 6 weeks old enter childcare. The systemic woke infiltration is happening in childcare centres also. My husband and I think, so Bonnie is actually, this is Bonnie. This is from not Angus. So Bonnie, thank you. Bonnie says, my husband and I have 7 children. All have attended the local council-run childcare preschool programs. We've pulled our youngest out and have opened a faith-filled Christian family daycare. Kids are being fed a worldly, woke curriculum from infancy within the education system. That's Bonnie in Shepparton in Victoria. Bonnie, thank you so much for that. Time is very short now as we reflect on things that Bonnie is saying here. But coming back to the fact that we are in an election campaign right now, and to come back to what we said a little earlier, that neither side, neither of the major parties is interested in doing anything about this at all. Yes. I'm just mindful that while right now Donald Trump might be seen in a bad light with all of the issues around these taxes that he's putting on nations all around the world, tariffs. But just a few weeks ago, he was being admired and hailed a hero because he got rid of DEI in the US. What do we do about our current election campaign, where we think about putting our first preferences when we're voting? Augusto, for listeners who are thinking, is there any sort of action I can take now? What comes to mind for you?
Well, look, it's quite clear that Trump is being demonized by the usual suspects, not so much because of the tariffs. The tariffs are a good excuse to go after him. We have a socialistic country. In this country, the taxes are very high. It's very unpleasant to be overtaxed. The more you work, the less money you have. When I had 2 jobs working for the Law Reform Commission, I realized that it's not good to have 2 jobs in Australia because you work twice more and you will basically make the same as a result. So this is all hypocritical. And one thing I have to say is that the conversations are all about money, but not so much about moral values. And it's all about how much government is going to bribe you in order to be elected. Unfortunately, the leader of the opposition is a bit woke himself, because he was behind the push for the disinformation bill. He only changed his mind when he realized how popular the issue was amongst the conservative voters. But his inclination is pretty authoritarian, and I don't see so much crave for reestablishing free speech in this country. When I wrote my Section 18C book, I launched the book from the headquarters of the Liberal Party in Western Australia, and I didn't get the level of support that was so needed to repeal that particular provision in the Anti-Discrimination Act. And of course, ever since, things have gotten much worse. They are now introducing legislation that effectively turn Australia into no longer a functional democracy. I have described Australia now as an elective dictatorship because free speech is essential for the preservation and maintenance of a democratic system based on the rule of law.
Well, we do need to draw to a close, and I know that listeners will agree that we're listening to real common sense here, and there is a criticism of both of the major parties around these issues of freedom, academic freedom, and the challenges that we face in the days ahead. Now, both of our guests today are courageously writing and lobbying our leaders. They are writing for those sorts of publications like The Spectator and Quadrant and the Epoch Times. You'll be able to find articles by Augusto Zimmermann and Emeritus Professor Gabriel Moens when you go on to those websites. The book that they wrote that we've been making some reference to today because we're talking about education and universities, their book is called The Unlucky Country. And inspired by Donald Horne's iconic book, The Lucky Country, published back in 1964, the authors of The Unlucky Country, that's Zimmermann and Moens, argue that Australia has now been transformed into an unlucky country. And this is an election season that we're in, worthy of asking and questioning your candidates and members around these issues of freedom as we draw close to an election. Let me say thank you so much to both of our guests. To you, Emeritus Professor Gabriel Moens, thank you so much for your input today.
Thank you for the interview.
And Professor Augusto Zimmermann, thank you for your insights.
Thank you. It's always a pleasure.
Thanks for taking time to listen to this audio on demand from Vision Christian Media. To find out more about us, go to vision.org.au.